So there is this ancient curse, well, a legend really, that honestly feels like something pulled straight out of like a Hollywood blockbuster.
Oh, absolutely. It's incredibly cinematic.
Yeah, but it has been whispered across the steppes for centuries. And the curse basically states that if the tomb of history's greatest conqueror, Genghis Khan, is ever found, the world will perish.
Right, which is quite the deterrent.
It really is. It's this haunting psychological deterrent. And remarkably, I mean, it seems to have actually worked because thousands of archaeologists and historians and, fortune seekers have scoured the earth for his final resting place.
And every single one of them has come up empty-handed.
Exactly. Zero success.
It is a chilling premise.
Yeah.
And I think it sets, the perfect tone for what we are exploring today. Because this legend isn't just some spooky campfire story.
Right.
It is a really profound reflection of how the country itself operates. I mean, Mongolia is a place that guards its history fiercely. The landscape itself acts as a vault.
And that is the exact premise of the source material we are unpacking today. It's a really detailed travel documentary transcript titled The Last Great Wilderness.
Yeah, it's a fascinating piece of work.
So the core mission of this deep dive, with you, the listener, right here as the third person in our conversation, is to understand how Mongolia actually hides its deepest secrets.
Because it doesn't lock them away in dusty library archives, right? Or museum basements.
No, not at all. It buries them under blinding sandstorms and these towering snow-capped peaks where people still live alongside wolves.
Which is just wild to think about.
Right. So we want to unpack how these enduring ancient traditions have somehow survived the rise and fall of empires. And ultimately, we want to ask a rather provocative question.
Yeah, the big one.
Could we survive if the modern world were to disappear?
And to even begin answering that, we have to look at a place that defies almost every convention of the 21st century.
Yeah, totally.
Mongolia really operates as a mirror,
Right.
kind of reflecting our own modern fragilities back at us. And the starkest example of this tension is found right at the center of it all.
You mean the capital city?
Exactly, the capital.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the capital, Ulaanbaatar, presents what is arguably the ultimate urban paradox.
It really does.
I mean, when most people think of bone-chilling, unforgiving cold, their minds immediately jump to places like Moscow or maybe Ottawa in Canada.
Sure, yeah, those are the usual suspects.
But Ulaanbaatar holds the actual title. It is the coldest capital city on the entire planet.
By a significant margin, too.
Yeah. The average annual temperature, like the year-round average, is literally below 0 degrees Celsius. And in the dead of winter, it routinely plunges to minus 40 degrees.
Which is where Celsius and Fahrenheit actually meet. Minus 40 is just...
It's unfathomable.
Right. And the mechanics of a city functioning at minus 40 degrees are incredibly complex. I mean, at that temperature, steel becomes brittle.
Wait, really? Steel?
Yeah, steel. And rubber tires can shatter like glass if they aren't formulated correctly.
Oh, wow.
Engine blocks will freeze solid overnight. So residents often have to keep their cars running periodically, or they use these specialized electric blankets for their engines just to be able to commute the next morning.
That is intense.
It is. It fundamentally alters how architecture is insulated and how a populace simply exists outdoors.
And despite those hostile conditions, this isn't some sparse, empty Arctic outpost. That is the paradox here.
Right, the density issue.
Exactly. Mongolia holds the record for the lowest population density of any sovereign country in the world, yet Ulaanbaatar itself is a hyper-dense urban center.
It's packed.
There are 1.5 million people crammed into this one freezing valley. That means essentially half of the entire nation's population is living in one concentrated footprint.
Which brings up the fascinating urban geography of how this settlement even came to be in this specific valley to begin with.
Yeah, how does that happen?
Well, most major global cities form around static, immovable geographical advantages, right? London has the Thames, New York has its Deepwater Harbor.
Rome has its defensible hills.
Exactly. They are anchored to the earth. But Ulaanbaatar's origin story is completely unanchored.
Yeah, the documentary compares it to an RV city.
That's a great analogy.
It's crazy. Before it became a permanent concrete metropolis, it was a mobile Buddhist monastery called Urga.
A literal moving city.
Yeah. This entire settlement packed up and moved locations 28 different times over the century.
28 times. I mean, the sheer logistical magnitude of moving a city that many times requires a level of coordination that is hard for modern urbanites to even grasp.
Because a monastery of that scale isn't just a few tents, right?
Not at all. We are talking about an entire social, economic, and spiritual ecosystem. Moving it required disassembling massive, ornate temple structures, coordinating thousands of wooden carts drawn by oxen and yaks, managing the seasonal grazing routes for the livestock that fed the monks.
And doing all of that before the winter sets in.
Exactly. Reassembling the entire complex in a new valley before the lethal winter arrives. It is nomadic culture scaled up to municipal infrastructure.
So the obvious question for you listening is, how does a wandering spiritual fleet of carts and yurts transform into a stationary, freezing concrete metropolis with a name like Ulaanbaatar?
Well, the nomenclature tells the entire geopolitical story. Ulaanbaatar translates to Red Hero.
Red Hero.
Right. In 1924, this was a deliberate rebranding to honor Damdin Sukbatar, the military leader who guided the Mongolian Revolution.
Okay, so a very 20th century political shift.
Absolutely. And crucially, he achieved this with the direct backing of the newly formed Soviet Union. So the name itself is a permanent linguistic stamp.
Marking the moment, the country kind of pivoted from a feudal nomadic theocracy toward the Soviet sphere of influence.
Precisely.
And you can really see that Soviet influence physically colliding with ancient nomadic culture the moment you walk down the street. The documentary paints this vivid picture of architectural whiplash.
Oh, the juxtaposition is wild.
Yeah. You have sleek, modern glass banking towers and luxury shopping malls, and right next door, literally sharing the same city block, are the Gobi districts.
The traditional yurts.
Yes. You have thousands of families still living in traditional round felt yurts, burning coal to stay warm, right in the middle of a modern capital.
It is a juxtaposition of eras occupying the exact same spatial reality. And presiding over all of it, both the hyper-modern commercialism and the traditional Durgar districts, is the ubiquitous presence of Genghis Khan.
Oh, he is everywhere.
Omnipresent.
His face is printed on the national currency, it's on the vodka bottles, it's on massive billboards across the city.
Ulaanbaatar is essentially a microcosm of Mongolia's broader identity synthesis.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's a city simultaneously trying to harmonize the spiritual legacy of a mobile monastery, the stark utilitarianism of Soviet brutalist architecture, the fierce independence of the 13th century Mongol Empire, and the hyper-connected commercialism of the modern global economy.
All in one freezing valley.
Exactly.
And that friction between Soviet history and imperial Mongolian memory isn't just present in the street layout, right? It is amplified to a massive scale in their monuments.
Oh, the scale is unbelievable.
Let's physically step out of the dense city streets for a second and look at how this nation immortalizes its memory, starting with a climb that will apparently leave anyone completely breathless.
Yes, the Zaisan Monument.
So imagine standing at the bottom of a steep hill on the southern edge of Ulaanbaatar. The air is freezing, and because you are sitting at over 1,300 meters of elevation, the air is also incredibly thin.
You feel it immediately.
And stretching up the hillside in front of you are over 600 concrete steps.
A genuine physical toll is required just to reach the summit to pay your respects.
Yeah, by the time you conquer those 600 steps, your lungs are burning. But the reward is this breathtaking 360-degree panoramic view of the entire valley and the sprawling city below.
It's an incredible vantage point.
But you aren't just there for the view. You are standing inside the Zaisan Monument.
Built by the Soviets in 1979, the Zaisan Monument was constructed to commemorate the 50th anniversary of the Khalkhin Gol victory.
Right, and for context, the battles of Khalkhin Gol took place in 1939, just right before the outbreak of World War II.
Yeah, it was a severe, uncleared border conflict between the Soviet Mongolian forces and the Japanese Kwantung Army.
And the documentary notes that this victory was crucial.
Very much so. It secured Mongolia's eastern borders and fundamentally deterred Japan from attacking the Soviet Union during the Second World War. So the monument honors the Soviet and Mongolian soldiers who fought and fell together.
The architecture of the monument sounds incredibly imposing. At the very center is this towering, majestic statue of a Russian soldier holding a victory flag.
Classic Soviet realism.
Yeah. But the most striking element is the structure surrounding him. It is a massive, raised concrete ring, almost like a halo floating in the sky.
And the entire interior wall of that ring is covered in a vibrant, highly detailed mosaic.
Mosaics were like a massive staple of Soviet monumental art, right?
Oh, absolutely. Utilizing thousands of individual colored tiles to create these indestructible public narratives. This specific mosaic serves as a visual timeline of the geopolitical alliance.
What exactly does it show?
It depicts scenes of Soviet support during the 1921 revolution, the joint victory at Khalkhin, and even the spaceflight of the first Mongolian cosmonaut in the Soviet space program.
Wow, so it covers a lot of ground.
It does. It is a permanent, unyielding reminder of a specific historical friendship, cast in concrete, overlooking the capital.
But as dominant and heavy as that Soviet monument is, it feels almost modest when you drive a few tens of kilometers out of the city, deep into the open steppe.
Ah, yes, Sunjin Bulldog.
Yeah, because rising out of the flat green grass, shimmering violently in the sunlight, is the Genghis Khan equestrian statue.
The scale of this structure really challenges human perception.
It's massive.
It is entirely clad in stainless steel, standing 40 meters tall.
For those of us using imperial, that's over 130 feet. And it weighs a staggering 250 tons.
Incredible engineering.
It is just a colossal, glittering Genghis Khan riding a massive horse, sitting completely alone in the wilderness. Now, I have a question about this because usually, when a nation erects a massive monument to its ultimate historical founder, they orient the statue to face the capital city.
Right, usually looking over the seat of modern power.
Exactly. But this giant Genghis Khan completely turns its back on Ulaanbaatar. Why is that?
Well, that orientation is highly deliberate. The statue faces east.
East, okay.
Yeah, in Mongolian cosmology, the east carries dual significance. On a universal level, it's the direction of the sunrise, which symbolizes eternal cycles and new beginnings.
That makes sense.
But more specifically to this monument, the east points directly toward Genghis Khan's birthplace in the Khenti Mountains. He's literally looking back toward his homeland.
That's a really beautiful detail. And the patch of ground the statue is built on isn't random either, right?
No, not at all. The documentary points out that this exact spot marks a very specific legendary event.
Right. Long before he was a world conqueror, when he was still a young man named Temujin fleeing from rival tribes, legend says he found a golden horsewhip lying on the ground right here.
And to understand the weight of that, we really have to look at the material culture of the steppe.
Okay, lay it on us.
For a nomadic herder and warrior, a horsewhip wasn't merely a tool for driving animals. It was a symbol of absolute authority, wealth, and good fortune.
So finding one out there was a big deal.
A huge deal. To find a golden whip out in the harsh wilderness wasn't viewed as just a lucky coincidence. It was interpreted as a divine mandate.
Like a sign from above.
Exactly. It was the physical sign that Tengri, the sky god, had chosen him to unite the warring tribes and conquer the world.
And the base of the monument reflects that massive imperial ambition, too. The statue sits on this massive circular building, completely surrounded by 36 colossal pillars.
Which structurally represent the 36 Khans, the unbroken lineage of leaders of the Mongol Empire, from Genghis Khan down to Ligdan Khan.
The exterior symbolism is so grand, but the interior, I gotta say, feels almost surreal based on the transcript.
It really is a unique experience.
You walk through the doors into the base, and you are immediately confronted by a traditional Mongolian boot. But this boot is 9 meters high.
A giant boot.
We are talking about a 30-foot tall piece of footwear. It is a fully functional, handcrafted replica made from the hides of 225 cows, stitched together using 4,500 meters of rope.
It's an immense undertaking.
Right. And I had to pause when I read that. I was like, why construct a 30-foot boot inside a steel horse? What's the point?
Well, it speaks to the cultural magnification of nomadic survival tools.
How so?
Think about it. The boots, with their upturned toes, which are designed to avoid scarring the earth, by the way, the whip, the horse. These are the implements that allow the Mongols to master an unforgiving environment.
I see.
By elevating an everyday object like a boot to an impossible mythic scale, they are elevating the daily life of the common nomad to the realm of the divine.
That is a really profound way to look at it. It's like a surreal theme park, but grounded in deep historical reverence.
Exactly. And the engineering of the experience goes even further.
Yeah, the observation deck.
Right. You can actually take an elevator up through the interior of the horse's chest, walk through a tunnel in its neck, and emerge onto an observation deck that rests right on the horse's head.
So you are standing on a stainless steel mane looking out over the vast rolling steppe.
And it is a brilliant psychological trick of architecture.
Yeah.
By positioning the observation deck on the horse's head rather than the Khan's shoulder, the visitor doesn't just look at the conqueror.
You share his view.
You are forced to share his perspective. You're invited to look at the world through the same vantage point that Genghis Khan himself would have had.
That is so clever. But as imposing as the Genghis Khan monument is, military conquest only accounts for half of the historical identity presented in our sources.
Right, there's another major force at play.
Exactly. While the armor of the empire is celebrated in steel, there is a quieter, profoundly resilient force that shaped the interior life of the country.
Buddhism.
Yes. If we shift our focus from these physical monuments of power to the spiritual structures of the nation, we encounter the story of Mongolian Buddhism, which is a story of incredible endurance against overwhelming violence.
The survival of Buddhism in Mongolia is honestly one of the most compelling narratives of cultural resilience in the 20th century.
So let's start right back in Ulaanbaatar, nestled among the modern traffic in those Soviet apartment blocks. There is a sprawling monastery with a beautiful Tibetan name, Gandenteg Chinlen.
It translates to the Great Abode of Complete Joy.
I love that name. And the source mentions that stepping through its gates completely alters your sensory environment.
Oh, totally. The ambient noise of the city just fades away. It's replaced by the deep, resonant chanting of monks, the spinning of brass prayer wheels, and the heavy, earthy scent of burning juniper and incense.
But the visual centerpiece of this monastery is staggering. Inside the main temple stands a 26.5-meter-tall statue of Avalokiteshvara,
The Bodhisattva of Compassion.
Right. It is made of copper, covered in gold leaf, and inlaid with over 2,000 precious stones.
It's visually stunning.
It is. But the detail that truly stands out to me is the internal engineering of the statue itself. It is entirely hollow.
And that hollow space serves as a literal vault of cultural preservation.
Packed with relics, right.
Exactly. Inside this giant golden figure, they have sealed away over 2 million Buddhist scriptures, tons of medicinal herbs, and, most astonishingly, an entire fully furnished traditional Mongolian yurt is resting inside the statue.
Wait, a whole yurt inside the statue?
Yes. And the symbology of placing a jir inside a sacred Buddhist figure is really profound.
Tell me more about that.
Well, the chigir is the fundamental architectural unit of Mongolian survival. It represents the family, the hearth, and the nomadic identity. So placing it inside the Bodhisattva represents the absolute fusion of indigenous nomadic culture with imported Tibetan Buddhist spiritualism.
They are inextricably linked.
Exactly. They cannot be separated.
And Ganden isn't just a static museum for these artifacts either. It is a highly active, living center for the community. The documentary highlights the courtyard scene, where locals and tourists are constantly buying grain to feed thousands of pigeons.
Right. And in modern Mongolian practice, feeding these birds is a tangible way to accumulate spiritual merit and pray for peace.
And that active participation extends deeply into the academic and practical functions of the monastery, too.
Ganden serves as the largest center of Buddhist scholarship in the country. The monks are engaged in rigorous studies of philosophy, traditional medicine, and astrology.
You can actually see everyday people lining up to consult with these monks. It's not just theory.
Right, it's very practical.
A practitioner of traditional Mongolian medicine will perform a highly complex pulse diagnosis, checking the rhythm and flow of the blood to prescribe specific herbal remedies based on ancient texts.
It's an ancient science.
And other families consult their resident astrologers to calculate auspicious dates for weddings, business ventures, or long journeys. It basically functions simultaneously as a hospital, a university, and a spiritual sanctuary.
It does. But, this vibrant open practice masks a very dark and relatively recent history.
The purges.
Right. Because this level of religious freedom was methodically eradicated less than a century ago.
Which brings us to the survival story of Erdene Zoo Monastery, located far out in the Orkhon Valley. Erdene Zoo has an unbelievable architectural origin.
Oh, the building materials.
Yeah. It was constructed in 1586, but the builders didn't quarry new stone. They took the literal bricks and stones from the ruined, abandoned city of Karakorum.
The legendary 13th century capital of the Mongol Empire.
Exactly. They recycled the imperial masonry of Genghis Khan's successors to build a Buddhist sanctuary.
And the perimeter wall of Erdene Zoo is iconic. It's adorned with exactly 108 white stupas.
108. That's a specific number.
It is. In Buddhist numerology, 108 is a highly sacred figure. It mathematically represents the different worldly troubles, temptations, and afflictions that a human consciousness must recognize and overcome to break the cycle of suffering and achieve enlightenment.
Wow. And for centuries, Erdene Zoo was massive. The documentary says it operated more like a bustling city than a quiet cloister. It contained over 60 different temples and housed more than 1,000 monks.
It was a massive hub.
But then the political landscape of the 1930s arrived.
Yes, the 1930s marked a period of intense Soviet-directed political and religious purges in Mongolia.
The sources outline this quite starkly.
They do. The government viewed the powerful, wealthy monasteries as a direct threat to socialist modernization and state control. So they initiated a systematic campaign to dismantle the cultural infrastructure.
Destroying hundreds of ancient monasteries.
And executing tens of thousands of monks. It was devastating.
But Erdinzu miraculously survived. And it wasn't because it was hidden away in some remote valley. The documentary notes a truly bizarre political calculation.
Right, involving Joseph Stalin.
Yes. Stalin supposedly insisted that Erdinzu be kept standing. He wanted to use the ancient monastery as a showcase museum.
It was an elaborate PR strategy.
Basically, yeah. It allowed Soviet and Mongolian officials to point to it when international observers visited, falsely claiming that they were preserving religious heritage while they were secretly destroying it everywhere else.
It was weaponized preservation. The physical structure was spared, but it was entirely stripped of its spiritual function, permitted to exist solely as propaganda for the regime orchestrating the purge.
So Erdinzu survived through cynical statecraft, but another architectural masterpiece survived through pure grassroots deception.
Amar Bayez Galant?
Yes, the Monastery of Tranquil Felicity.
Built in 1727, Amar Bayez Galant is an engineering marvel of the steppe.
The construction techniques described in the source are fascinating. When you examine the massive wooden structures, you won't find a single iron nail holding them together.
Not one.
The entire complex was engineered using intricate, interlocking wooden joints, like a massive three-dimensional puzzle that can absorb the stress of extreme temperature shifts.
Which is necessary in that climate.
And furthermore, they carved a hidden drainage system directly into the stone architecture, where rainwater is channeled through the roofs and pours out of the mouths of stone gargoyles.
So the challenge during the 1930s was, how do you protect a structure of that magnitude from government demolition squads?
And the local people orchestrated a brilliant act of architectural camouflage. When the purge officials arrived in the valley, the locals presented a unified front and outright lied.
A necessary lie.
They claimed that these massive, ornate buildings were not temples at all, but rather giant, elaborately designed warehouses used strictly for storing the region's grain reserves.
They willingly stripped the buildings of their divine identity to save their physical form.
That is so smart.
By convincing the officials that the structures had utilitarian value to the state's agricultural goals, they just outsmarted the totalitarian bureaucracy.
It's an incredible story of playing possum with history. And because they did that, the masterpiece stands today, still holding ancient Buddhist scriptures and hosting massive annual ceremonies.
Like the Sam Mask dance.
Yes, where monks don these vibrant, terrifying, oversized masks of wrathful guardian deities, performing intricate dances to ward off evil spirits and cleanse the valley.
However, to fully grasp the trauma of the 1930s, we really must acknowledge the monasteries that possessed no such camouflage.
Right. They didn't all make it.
No. The ruins of Anji Monastery in the arid Gobi region serve as a stark memorial to what was lost.
During its peak, Anji was a colossal hub of learning. It straddled a river comprising 28 distinct temples, 4 Buddhist universities, and housing over 1,000 monks.
But Anji was shown absolutely no mercy by the purge squads. It was systematically leveled.
The structural destruction was absolute, and the human cost was horrific. Historical accounts in the documentary suggest over 200 senior monks were executed on the grounds.
And the younger survivors were forcibly stripped of their robes, made to break their vows, and conscripted into the very military apparatus that had just destroyed their home.
It's heartbreaking. Today, all that remains of those 28 temples are crumbled brick and stone foundations scattered across the dry hills.
It's a very somber sight.
But the documentary reveals a deeply moving epilogue to this site. Following Mongolia's peaceful transition to democracy in 1990, the practice of Buddhism was legalized again.
And the monks returned to the ruins.
They gathered funds and erected a small, modest temple right on top of the scarred earth of Anji.
Visitors to the Anji ruins often report experiencing a profound, heavy energy. It is a place of immense historical grief.
I can imagine.
But seeing a handful of young monks reciting ancient sutras among the rubble demonstrates that while regimes can destroy brick and mortar, they struggle to permanently extinguish an idea.
It is a powerful testament to endurance. But, as we move from the structures built by human hands, we realized from the documentary that the greatest sanctuaries in Mongolia were never constructed at all.
Right, the natural landscape itself.
Exactly. The landscape holds myths and historical weight that outlast any political regime. So let's shift our focus to the natural temples of Mongolia, the rivers, the stones, and the sacred waters that shaped the empire.
The environment in Mongolia is not merely a passive backdrop to human history. It is the primary engine of it. And the ultimate cradle of this nomadic civilization is the Orkhon Valley.
The Orkhon River snakes through the steppe for 698 miles, making it the longest river contained entirely within Mongolia's borders.
Its geographical significance is really matched only by its historical utility.
How so?
Well, the Orkhon Valley is widely recognized as the seat of power for successive nomadic empires, from the Xiongnu to the Turkic Khaganate, and ultimately the Mongol Empire.
And the documentary makes a brilliant ecological connection here. When you look at this fast-flowing river, you have to understand the chain reaction it creates.
The constant water supply.
Yes, the constant water supply from the Orkhon feeds the lush, expansive pastures of the valley. And those endless pastures were capable of sustaining tens of thousands of horses.
And those horses were the biological engines that powered the terrifying, highly mobile cavalry armies of Genghis Khan.
Right. The Orkhon River is the literal liquid fuel of the Mongol Empire.
And geologically, the valley bears the scars of violent prehistoric forces too.
Yeah, if you follow the river long enough, the flat earth suddenly gives way and a deep, thunderous roar fills the air. The river plunges 65 feet into a dark basalt gorge, creating the Orkhon waterfall.
It's a dramatic drop.
And it wasn't carved slowly by water over millions of years, right? It was created roughly 20,000 years ago when massive volcanic eruptions and tectonic earthquakes violently split the valley floor open.
Yet the most remarkable aspect of the Orkhon Valley isn't the ancient geology, but the continuity of human life existing upon it.
This is the part that blows my mind. As you stand by that roaring waterfall today, the sensory experience is remarkably unchanged from antiquity.
It's like stepping back in time.
You smell the smoke of wood and dried dung fires. You see the white, round vikers dotting the green hillsides. You watch nomadic families riding their tough, stout horses, wrangling flocks of sheep and herding massive, thick-coated yaks.
They're navigating this beautiful, volatile landscape, utilizing the exact same pastoral techniques their ancestors perfected over 2,000 years ago.
2 millennia of unbroken ecological routine.
And nestled within this ancient lived-in landscape is a bizarre geological anomaly that serves as a focal point for both myth and recorded history.
Taikarchulu.
Yes.
Taikarchulu.
Visually, Taikarchulu makes absolutely no sense. You are standing in a completely flat river valley, miles away from any cliffs or mountain ranges, and sitting right there in the middle of the grass is a massive sheer block of granite, 20 meters high. It looks exactly like a giant meteorite that dropped straight out of the sky and embedded itself in the earth.
And when humans encounter a geographical anomaly of that scale, they naturally weave folklore around it to explain its presence.
Of course. And the local legend is incredibly cinematic.
It claims that long ago, a ferocious, giant snake emerged from a subterranean cave and began terrorizing the people and livestock of the valley.
Classic monster tale.
Yeah, and a legendary hero named Bokbilig engaged the monster in battle. As the snake tried to retreat into its underground lair, the warrior summoned superhuman strength, lifted this massive 20-meter rock, and hurled it across the valley, pinning the snake's head to the earth forever.
Folklore insists that the snake remains imprisoned beneath the rock. But from an archaeological perspective, Taikarchulu serves an arguably more fascinating purpose.
What's that?
It functions as a multi-millennial public guest book.
Oh, the inscriptions.
Right. Over the centuries, travelers passing through the valley utilized the sheer, flat faces of the rock as a canvas. There are over 150 distinct inscriptions carved into the granite.
Utilizing various ancient scripts, right? Like Turkic runic, Uyghur, Tibetan, and Mongolian.
Yes. You can find everything from spiritual prayers and public decrees to the literal signatures of traveling monks, merchants on the Silk Road, and military generals who marched their armies past the rock over 1,000 years ago.
That is so cool, and it remains a site of active veneration today. Visitors adhere to a tactile ritual of respect. They tie blue kadag traditional ceremonial silk scarves around its base to honor the local spirits.
There is also a tradition where visitors search for a small stone and attempt to throw it so that it lands and stays on the very top of Taikar Chulib.
And if the stone stays, it is believed the spirits will grant the thrower good fortune or a deeply held wish.
Okay, here is where the hydrology of Mongolia gets even more extreme. We move from a river that fueled empires to a massive body of water that the locals reverently call the Mother Ocean.
We are talking about Lake Khuvsgul in the north.
Lake Khuvsgul is the pristine, deep blue jewel of the Mongolian taiga. Both chronologically and chemically, it is a scientific marvel.
Most lakes have a relatively short geological lifespan, right? Over tens of thousands of years, they slowly fill up with silt and sediment, eventually turning into marshes and disappearing.
But not Khuvsgul.
No. Geological estimates place this lake at over 2 million years old. It sits in a massive tectonic depression, and it is so incredibly deep that it contains 70% of Mongolia's entire freshwater supply.
To put that in global perspective, that single lake holds roughly 1% of all the available liquid fresh water on planet Earth.
And the purity of that water is almost unnatural. The documentary states that the water is so clear you can see dozens of meters straight down into the depths.
It is so devoid of sediment and pollutants that you don't need a filtration system or purification tablets.
You can just drink it.
You can simply lean over the side of a boat, scoop the water into your hands, and drink it straight from the lake.
Wow. However, the welcoming, pristine nature of the lake vanishes when the brutal Mongolian winter sets in.
Oh, the freeze is intense.
The same sub-zero temperatures that paralyze Ulaanbaatar freeze the surface of Lake Khuvsgul into a sheet of ice so thick and structurally sound that it historically altered national logistics.
During the 20th century, the ice became a literal highway.
A highway over a lake.
Yeah. Heavy Russian military and commercial transport convoys, we are talking about massive multi-ton trucks loaded with supplies, would regularly drive straight across the frozen surface of the lake.
It was the fastest route across the northern wilderness.
And surrounding this massive frozen basin is the taiga, a dense subarctic coniferous forest. And navigating this specific ecosystem is a distinct indigenous group known as the Satan.
The Satan are one of the very last surviving reindeer-herding tribes on the planet.
And visually, their lifestyle differs sharply from the nomads of the open steppe.
Yeah, instead of the round Feldleggers, the Satan live in conical teepee tents, similar to those historically used by indigenous peoples of North America.
Their entire socioeconomic and spiritual existence is deeply entwined with their reindeer herds.
The documentary stresses that this is a true biological symbiosis. The reindeer are not just livestock to be fenced in and consumed, they are indispensable companions.
Right. The Satan ride them through the dense, snowy forests where horses would struggle. They use their milk for sustenance and rely on them for warmth. Surviving the subarctic taiga without the reindeer would be fundamentally impossible.
While Lake Khuvsgul commands awe through its sheer ancient mass, the sources detail another body of water that captivates through its bizarre, localized behavior.
Lake Geyser.
Now, first, a crucial geographical clarification from the source text. Lake Geyser is technically located just across the border in the Altai Republic of Russia.
Right, but it exists right on the edge of the shared Mongolian-Siberian cultural and ecological sphere.
Exactly. Secondly, despite the dramatic name, there are absolutely no geysers shooting water into the air here.
What the lake actually does is arguably much stranger and visually hypnotic.
It is a very small, shallow pool, only about 2 meters deep, hidden away in an ancient pine forest. The water itself is a brilliant, crystal-clear turquoise, colored by specific clays and mineral deposits.
But the floor of the lake is highly active.
Underground thermal springs are constantly pushing gentle streams of green gas and heated mud up through the lake bed.
The thermal dynamics create a mesmerizing visual effect.
Yeah, the transcript says as the mud pushes up, it forms these beautiful, shifting, concentric circles of vibrant green clay across the bottom of the pool. It expands and contracts. It looks like the lake is slowly breathing.
And because those subterranean springs are constantly pumping warm thermal water into the basin, the lake completely defies the winter.
The contrast is jarring. The ambient air temperature around the lake can easily drop to minus 40 degrees, and the surrounding pine forest will be buried in deep snow.
Yet Lake Geyser never freezes.
It just sits there in the freezing snow, a vibrant, liquid, breathing green oval.
You can understand exactly why the indigenous peoples of the Altai region named it the Eye of the Earth.
That's a great name.
They perceived it as a spiritual portal, a literal eye, where the living planet was looking back up at the sky.
That concept of a living, breathing landscape is beautiful. But we must also address the reality that much of Mongolia's geography does not nurture life. It actively challenges it.
Absolutely. To understand the true depth of nomadic resilience, we have to look at how humans and animals have adapted to the most unforgiving extremes of the country, specifically the Gobi Desert and the Altai Mountains.
When you say the word desert, human psychology defaults to a very specific visual archetype.
We picture the Sahara.
Right. We imagine a blazing, unbearable yellow sun, sweating through our clothes and staring out at endless, rolling oceans of soft, fine sand.
The Gobi Desert fundamentally shatters that archetype.
It completely flips the script on what a desert can be, because the Gobi is classified as a cold desert.
It sits on a high plateau and is exposed to the Siberian winds, so the temperature swings are violent and extreme.
During the winter, the temperature plummets far below freezing, and you will frequently see the desert landscape blanketed in bright white snow.
And here's the geological fact that completely changed my perspective.
Yeah.
Only about 5 to 10% of the entire Gobi Desert is actually composed of sand dunes.
That is wild. Just 5 to 10%.
Yes, the vast majority of the Gobi's immense landmass consists of barren, exposed rock, harsh gravel plains, and unforgiving, cracked clay plateaus.
It's a highly abrasive, brutal topography. It tears apart vehicle tires and makes overland travel incredibly punishing.
But nature is endlessly adaptable.
Yeah, when I was reading the source transcript, I actually had to stop and reread a specific section. It mentioned a desert bear.
The Gobi bear.
Yeah, I had to ask myself, how does a bear, a massive furry mammal that we associate with lush forests, eating berries and catching salmon in rivers, biologically function in a barren, freezing, rocky desert?
It sounds like a biological contradiction. But the Gobi bear, known locally as the mausolei, is a profound example of evolutionary adaptation. They are noticeably smaller than brown bears, which helps them require fewer calories. They have adapted their diet to survive entirely on sparse desert roots, specifically wild rhubarb, along with berries from oasis bushes and small rodents.
Oh, interesting.
Furthermore, they are uniquely adapted to retain water and survive the harsh temperature fluctuations. However, this extreme specialization comes at a cost.
The population numbers.
Right. There are only an estimated 50 individuals left in the wild, making them the rarest bear species on the planet.
50 bears clinging to existence in that vast rocky expanse. And they share this harsh environment with another biological marvel, the wild Bactrian camel.
Unlike the more common single-humped dromedary camels found in the Middle East and Africa, the Bactrian camel possesses 2 humps,
which store fat that can be converted into water and energy.
These wild camels are absolute survival machines. They grow thick, shaggy coats to survive the freezing Gobi winters, which they then shed entirely during the blistering summer months.
But their most astonishing adaptation is their kidneys.
Right, the salt water.
Yeah, when freshwater sources dry up entirely, these wild camels can literally drink highly saline salt water from desert salt pans and process it without dying of dehydration.
That is evolution at its finest. But just like the Gobi bear, they are critically endangered. The desert is naturally harsh, but the expanding impact of human activity is harsher.
The Gobi itself is undergoing a volatile transition right now.
Driven by climate change and overgrazing, the desert is rapidly expanding outward in a process known as desertification.
The dry, arid land is actively encroaching on fertile steppes and agricultural areas.
The threat is so severe that China, located immediately to the south, has initiated massive geoengineering projects like the Green Great Wall.
That's an unprecedented effort to plant billions of trees along the desert's southern edge, right?
Yes, to act as a windbreak and stop the sand from swallowing their northern cities.
But even within this harsh, expanding wasteland, the Gobi produces moments of profound, almost magical phenomena.
Like the dunes.
Yeah, we noted earlier that only a small fraction of the Gobi is actual sand. The most famous accumulation of that sand is a dune system called Kongorin Els,
known universally as the Singing Sands.
These dunes are monstrous. They rise hundreds of meters into the air with incredibly steep faces. The documentary describes climbing them as a brutal test of cardiovascular endurance.
Because the fine sand offers no traction.
Right. For every 2 agonizing steps you take up the slope, you slide 1 step back down. But the exertion is rewarded by an incredible acoustic phenomenon.
The singing.
Yeah, when the high desert winds blow fiercely across the ridges, or when a person triggers a small avalanche of sand by sliding down the face, the friction of billions of microscopic dry silica grains rubbing against each other generates a loud, resonant, rumbling noise.
The acoustic resonance is so deep and powerful that locals have historically compared it to the sound of distant drums thundering from within the earth.
It is essentially a mountain of sand playing itself like a massive instrument, and the visual spectacle matches the audio.
The colors shift, don't they?
Because of the specific mineral composition of the sand, the color of the Kongor'an L's dunes shifts dramatically depending on the angle of the sun. In the crisp morning light, they are a pale, ghostly yellow.
And by midday,
they turn a bright, reflective gold. And as the sun sets, the shadows stretch out and the sand shifts into deep, fiery shades of orange, red, and even dark purple.
That striking fiery red coloration is the defining geological feature of another legendary location within the Gobi, Bayanzag.
Most of the world knows it by its cinematic English name, the Flaming Cliffs.
Though it's worth noting that the dramatic name wasn't coined by the indigenous Mongolians.
Right. They call the area Bayanzag, which practically translates to rich in saxel trees, referring to the resilient desert shrubs that grow there. The name Flaming Cliffs was actually bestowed by an American explorer and paleontologist named Roy Chapman Andrews during an expedition in 1922.
And when you observe these eroded sandstone cliffs during a sunset, the name makes perfect sense. The angle of the dying light catches the red and orange iron oxide in the rock,
making the entire jagged landscape look as if it is literally glowing with fire. It resembles the desolate surface of Mars.
But Roy Chapman Andrews didn't just give the area a dramatic nickname. In 1923, his team made a discovery in the ravines of those flaming cliffs that completely revolutionized the scientific understanding of life on Earth.
It was a watershed moment in the history of paleontology.
Prior to 1923, the scientific community had absolutely no idea how dinosaurs reproduced.
Did they give birth to young, modern mammals? Did they reproduce in the water like amphibians? It was a total mystery.
But while scanning the eroded red sandstone of the Gobi, Andrews and his team discovered a nest containing the world's very first scientifically recognized fossilized dinosaur eggs.
In one afternoon, in the middle of a barren desert, they proved that dinosaurs laid eggs.
And those fragile eggs were preserved precisely because the ancient environment was drastically different from the current desert.
Millions of years ago, during the Cretaceous period, this arid, fiery landscape was a lush environment bordering a vast inland sea.
As tectonic forces shifted and the waters receded, layers of sediment buried the dinosaur remains. Over subsequent millennia, wind and water erosion carved away the earth, re-exposing the ancient timeline.
You can visually read that deep geological timeline when you visit places like the Sagan-Suvarga Cliffs. From a distance, the formations look like the ruined walls of an ancient abandoned city.
But when you get up close,
you realize it is a sheer 60-meter-high cliff face composed of distinct horizontal bands of colored rock. You see thick stripes of pink, orange, purple, and yellow.
Every single colored band represents a different geological era, a layer of sediment laid down over millions of years, now sliced open and exposed to the relentless Gobi wind.
If the Gobi Desert represents the extreme of the arid, scorched earth, the western edge of Mongolia represents the extreme of the freezing sky, the Altai Mountains.
The name Altai translates to gold in Mongolian and Turkic languages.
And while there are rich mineral deposits in the region, the name is perfectly captured by the way the setting sun strikes the jagged, glacier-covered peaks,
turning the entire high-altitude skyline a shimmering, brilliant, golden hue. It is an immense, towering, intimidating landscape.
The geography reaches its literal pinnacle at Mount Khuton, which stands at over 4,300 meters above sea level.
Mount Khuton sits at an incredible, tense geopolitical intersection.
If you possess the mountaineering skill to reach the summit, you can stand on the peak, look down, and simultaneously see the borders of Mongolia, Russia, and China converging.
It is the frozen roof of Central Asia.
And stalking the crags of those freezing golden peaks is the snow leopard, arguably the most elusive and highly adapted big cat on the planet.
But the defining feature of the Altai is not just its wild fauna. It is defined by a unique human culture that has mastered the incredibly dangerous art of living in symbiosis with apex predators.
The Kazakh people. They are a semi-nomadic group inhabiting the western Altai region, and they practice a tradition that requires a level of patience and bravery that is difficult to comprehend.
They are golden eagle hunters, locally known as Berkuchi.
This is not a modern tourist attraction or a casual sport. It is a rigorous survival tradition that archaeological evidence suggests has been practiced on the Central Asian steppes for over 12,000 years.
Think about that timeline. 12,000 years.
Long before the construction of the Egyptian pyramids. Long before the invention of written language, people in the Altai Mountains were forming hunting partnerships with giant, lethal birds of prey.
And to understand how this works, we have to look at the psychology of the practice.
It's not like having a pet.
Not at all. The relationship between the hunter and the eagle is not one of domestication, like a human and a hunting dog. You cannot break an eagle's spirit or force it to obey out of fear.
The practice requires forging an intensely profound partnership built on mutual respect and shared survival.
The process begins with incredible delicacy. The hunters scale the treacherous cliff faces to capture a female eagle when she's very young, often right from the nest.
Female eagles are preferred because they grow larger, stronger, and more aggressive than the males.
From that moment on, the hunter spends years patiently training the bird. He hand feeds her, speaks to her constantly, and carries her on his arm for hours to build a bond of absolute trust.
For 7 or 8 years, the man and the eagle operate as a synchronized team, surviving the brutal -40-degree winters by hunting foxes, corsac, and hares together in the deep snow.
You will see these hunters wearing massive, thick fur coats, crafted entirely from the pelts their own eagles have struck down.
But the element of this tradition that elevates it from mere survival to something deeply spiritual is how the partnership ultimately concludes.
This is the detail that truly reframes the entire practice.
After 7 or 8 years of this intimate bond, the hunter does not keep the eagle in captivity until she dies. The hunter takes this magnificent apex predator, a creature he has nurtured, bonded with, and relied upon to feed his family, carries her high up into the mountains, and willingly releases her back into the wild.
They let her go so she can find a mate, build her own nest, and live out the remainder of her natural life free in the Altai winds.
It proves definitively that the Kazakh hunters view the eagle not as property to be owned, but as a temporary, highly honored guest in their lives.
They borrow the lethal strength of nature to survive their youth, and then they respectfully return that strength back to the mountain.
Every October, the Kazakhs celebrate this incredible interspecies bond at the Golden Eagle Festival, held near the 5 sacred peaks.
It is a dramatic, visually stunning gathering where hunters from across the region convene to showcase the speed, agility, and training of their birds in various competitions.
You see the traditional Mongolian round sagers pitched right next to the taller, brightly decorated Kazakh yurts. It is a powerful demonstration of indigenous cultures not just surviving, but thriving in an environment that would kill an unprepared modern human in a matter of hours.
That resilience, that ability to thrive in the face of brutal extremes, naturally prompts us to ask, how do the people of Mongolia celebrate this enduring connection to their landscape and their history?
How do they visually and physically tie their ancient ancestors to their living, breathing present?
We can find the answer by looking at how they have literally carved their memory into the earth itself, beginning with a place called Bagagazarin Chulu.
The name translates to the land of small rocks, which is perhaps the greatest geographical understatement on the steppe. There is absolutely nothing small about this place.
It is a massive, sprawling granite mountain range that erupts from the flat plains at an altitude of nearly 1,800 meters.
The documentary notes that when you approach it from a distance, the tight clustering of the stone formations makes it look like an abandoned, ancient, fortified city.
But it is entirely the work of nature.
Millions of years of harsh wind and water erosion have stripped away the softer earth, leaving behind these massive granite blocks stacked on top of each other in bizarre, precarious shapes.
Depending on the angle, the rocks look like resting elephants, giant turtles, or even weathered human faces staring out over the grass.
Because the geology is so fractured, it is full of deep crevices, hidden canyons, and caves. And because of that topography, it historically served as a critical sanctuary.
During the violent 19th century conflicts and the intense 20th century religious purges we discussed earlier, monks who were fleeing the destruction of their monasteries ran into the labyrinth of Bagagazarin Chulu.
The natural granite fortress provided perfect camouflage, allowing them to hide from the authorities and secretly preserve their faith.
They sought refuge in places like the Bowler Cave, a deep cavern lined with natural, sharp quartz crystals where ancient sages and hiding monks alike would sit in sensory deprivation, meditating in the dark.
But the stones of the Mongolian steppe hold mysteries that stretch much further back in time than the Buddhist era. To witness the true ancient origins of the culture, we have to examine the deer stones.
These are arguably the most enigmatic and visually striking artifacts on the entire steppe.
We are talking about tall, rectangular standing stone pillars planted vertically in the grass. A common misconception for visitors is to look at anything historical in Mongolia and automatically attribute it to Genghis Khan.
But the deer stones vastly predate the Mongol Empire.
Carbon dating and archaeological context place these stones squarely in the late Bronze Age, meaning they have been standing out there in the wind for over 3,000 years.
And despite being scattered across an immense geographical area, their visual language is remarkably consistent and incredibly sophisticated.
Over 90% of these pillars feature deep, intricate carvings of deer. But the artists didn't depict the deer just standing still or grazing on the grass.
The deer are carved in these elongated, highly stylized, fluid postures.
Their antlers sweep back dramatically, their legs are tucked, and their snouts point upward, making it look as though they are galloping through the air, literally flying up the surface of the stone toward the sky.
Archaeologists and anthropologists interpret this flying deer motif as serving a deeply spiritual, shamanic function. The deer are widely believed to act as psychopomps.
Meaning they are spiritual guides for the dead.
Precisely. The stones themselves are thought to be cenotaphs or monumental markers dedicated to fallen warriors or distinguished tribal leaders.
The flying deer were carved to act as divine vehicles, tasked with leading the soul of the warrior away from the earthly realm, carrying them upward through the heavens to ensure their safe arrival in an eternal afterlife.
The imagery is hauntingly beautiful, but what makes the deer stones so compelling is the profound mystery surrounding their creation.
We have absolutely no idea who actually carved them.
Because the society that created them had no written language, no record survived.
The early nomadic civilization that conceptualized these flying deer, the people who possessed the engineering skill to quarry, haul, and plant these massive stones across the endless steppe, remain entirely anonymous to us.
They were a ghost culture whose name is lost to time, but whose magnificent art refuses to fall down.
The deer stones represent the silent, unmoving reverence for the past. But if we want to witness the loud, vibrant, physically exhausting, living connection to the ancestors, we must turn to the ultimate cultural expression of the nation, the Naadam festival.
Naadam is the undisputed heartbeat of Mongolian culture.
The documentary is very clear on this point. Naadam is not merely a party or a modern sporting event designed for television. It is the absolute soul and pride of the nomadic people.
It is a massive, nationwide cultural gathering with origins that stretch back thousands of years into antiquity.
And like so many foundational elements of Mongolian culture, Naadam finds its roots in strict military pragmatism.
It began as a rigorous physical audit.
In ancient times, tribal leaders utilized the Naadam competitions to evaluate the martial skills, physical fitness, and endurance of their soldiers.
During the era of Genghis Khan, the stakes of these games were raised to an imperial level.
He used the Naadam tournaments as a literal, brutal scouting ground. He would watch the competitions to identify and select the absolute best, fastest, and most powerful warriors to serve in the vanguard of the Mongolian cavalry.
The festival is structurally centered around three core disciplines, historically referred to as the three manly games: wrestling, horse racing, and archery.
However, it is vital to correct that historical moniker, as modern Mongolian women actively, fiercely, and successfully compete in both the archery and horse racing events.
The wrestling, however, remains the exclusive, highly ritualized domain of men, and the mechanics of Mongolian wrestling, known as bok, are completely wild to an outsider.
First of all, there are absolutely no weight classes.
Which fundamentally alters the physics and strategy of the combat.
Completely. You will regularly see a lean, agile, 70-kilogram wrestler stepping onto the grass to face off against a massive 150-kilogram giant.
Because there's no weight parity, the sport relies heavily on advanced leverage, flawless balance, and explosive pure strength.
There is no time limit, and there is no ring. The match continues until any part of a wrestler's body, other than the soles of their feet or the palms of their hands, touches the earth.
The moment a knee or an elbow hits the dirt, you lose.
But perhaps the most visually distinct and culturally revealing aspect of bok is the traditional uniform.
The attire tells a brilliant historical story.
The wrestlers wear special heavy boots and tight shorts, along with a very specific tight long-sleeve jacket called a zodog. But the zodog is designed so that the entire chest is cut completely open, leaving the wrestler's torso entirely bare to the wind.
Why design a jacket that exposes the chest? Well, The local legend states that centuries ago, an unknown warrior entered the Grand Nadam tournament.
This mysterious fighter was faster, stronger, and possessed vastly superior technique, proceeding to systematically defeat every single male champion on the steppe.
The revelation came only after the final victory, when the undefeated warrior removed their attire to reveal that they were, in fact, a woman in disguise.
She completely humiliated the greatest fighters of the empire in front of everyone.
And the bruised male egos of the era were so deeply traumatized by this public defeat that they literally codified a new rule into the uniform.
From that day forward, the jackets had to have an open chest, providing immediate, undeniable visual proof before the match even started that all contestants were definitively male.
It is a humorous and highly revealing piece of folklore baked permanently into the official rules of the sport. The wrestling also incorporates deep elements of shamanistic nature worship.
Before a match begins, and immediately after a victory, the wrestlers perform a highly stylized, slow-motion dance.
They wave their arms to mimic the powerful soaring flight of an eagle, physically demonstrating their strength while paying direct reverence to the wild spirits of the mountains.
Then you transition to the horse racing, which requires you to throw out whatever image you have of Western equestrian sports.
This is not a quick 2-minute sprint around a perfectly manicured flat dirt oval like the Kentucky Derby.
Nadam horse racing is a grueling, brutal test of long-distance endurance. Depending on the age class of the horses, the races are run straight across the open, uneven, wild steppe over distances ranging from 15 to 30 kilometers.
And the jockeys executing this dangerous ride are astonishingly young.
The riders are children. You will see kids anywhere between 5 and 12 years old gripping the reins.
The logic behind this is purely mechanical. A lighter, smaller rider drastically reduces the burden on the horse, allowing the animal to run much faster and maintain its critical stamina over the massive distance.
But the cultural ethos of the race dictates that the human rider is entirely secondary to the event.
The horse is the absolute main character.
The prestige belongs to the animal and the trainer. When the race concludes, the crowd gathers to sing elaborate, poetic songs praising the speed, heart, and lineage of the winning horse.
But the moment that truly demonstrates the empathy of the nomadic culture occurs at the back of the pack.
The crowd will intentionally gather around to sing a special, dedicated song to comfort the horse that finishes dead last.
It is a profound public acknowledgement of the animal's physical effort and spirit, honoring its participation regardless of the failure to win.
The final discipline, archery, demands absolute surgical precision and is deeply infused with musicality.
The targets are not the giant painted wooden bullseyes you see in the Olympics.
Mongolian archers use composite bows to shoot at small cylindrical targets made of stacked leather rings placed directly on the ground, often from a distance of 75 meters.
And when an arrow finally strikes the leather rings, the judges standing near the targets don't just hold up a flag or blow a whistle.
They raise their arms, perform a rhythmic movement, and sing a traditional soaring melody called the ukai to signal the successful score to the crowd. Every single strike is celebrated with music.
Naturally, executing and observing a festival of this physical magnitude requires incredible amounts of caloric energy, which brings us to the unique culinary traditions that fuel Nadam.
The documentary is hilariously strict about this rule. If you attend Nadam and you do not consume kushur, it is as if you were never really there. It invalidates your attendance.
Kushur is the undisputed staple food of the festival environment.
It is a large, flat, circular pastry filled heavily with minced lamb or beef, highly seasoned with wild onions and garlic, and deep fried in oil until it is blistering hot.
But the cultural relationship with the food goes beyond mere calories.
Traditional Mongolian belief holds that holding this piping hot, greasy pastry between your fingertips actually stimulates specific acupressure points in the hands.
Yeah.
The intense heat is thought to improve blood circulation and stimulate the nervous system while you eat.
And to wash down the heavy fried meat and maintain stamina throughout the multi-day festival, the attendees rely on arag.
Arag is fermented horse milk.
The nomads take fresh mare's milk, place it in a leather sack, and churn it thousands of times until it ferments into a slightly sour, effervescent drink that contains a small, warming kick of alcohol.
It is packed with essential vitamins and minerals, serving as the biological fuel that keeps the child jockeys riding, the archers focusing, and the heavyweights wrestling from dawn until dusk.
When you synthesize all of these disparate elements, the intricate eagle dances, the legends of disguised female warriors, the child jockeys crossing the steppe, the singing referees, and the acupressure of hot meat pastries, you realize that Nadam transcends the definition of a sporting competition.
It acts as a massive, living museum. It is a flawless, dynamic blend of nomadic art, oral traditions, ancient military rituals, and folk sports, all executed simultaneously on the open grass.
It serves as the ultimate venue for the Mongolian people to wear their most vibrant, intricately embroidered traditional silk clothing, known as deals, gather with their massive extended families, and unapologetically celebrate their free-spirited, fiercely independent lifestyle out there on the vast, unbroken steppe.
As we step back from the granular details of the documentary and survey the entirety of what we've discussed today, a highly cohesive portrait emerges. We see a nation whose entire historical and modern identity is forged in the crucible of absolute extremes.
We started our journey in the urban paradox of Ulaanbaatar, a freezing, hyperdense capital city where modern glass-banking skyscrapers are literally casting shadows on traditional round felt characters.
We saw Soviet concrete monuments built to celebrate geopolitical alliances, staring down at massive stainless steel statues of Genghis Khan facing his homeland.
We explored ancient, intricate Buddhist monasteries like Amar Bayaz Galant that survived totalitarian demolition squads through the brilliant deception of pretending to be grain silos.
And we witnessed the grief of Angi, a spiritual center wiped off the map, only to see young monks slowly returning to chant among the ruins in the desert.
We examined a landscape defined by brutal, unyielding paradoxes. The coldest capital city on Earth. A vast Gobi Desert that confounds expectations by being comprised mostly of freezing, shattered rock rather than soft sand, where rare bears eat roots to survive.
We looked at ancient tectonic lakes holding a fraction of the world's fresh water, tiny thermal pools that breathe green mud and refuse to freeze in sub-zero temperatures, and towering golden mountains where humans and apex predators hunt together in an ancient, respectful symbiosis.
And we saw nomadic families in the Orkhon Valley, living off the volatile land, herding yaks and horses in the exact same logistical manner their ancestors perfected over 2,000 years ago.
Which brings us full circle to the core mission we established at the beginning of this deep dive.
If we connect all of this to the broader trajectory of human history, the documentary leaves us with a profound, somewhat unsettling realization.
We currently inhabit an era defined by rapid global modernization, profound digital dependency, and the looming specter of climate change.
Our modern infrastructure is highly advanced, but it is also deeply fragile. A localized failure in a power grid, a cyber attack on a logistics network, or a disruption in global shipping lanes can bring the comforts of our modern lives to an absolute chaotic halt.
But Mongolia stands in stark contrast as this massive, enduring test case of human endurance and adaptability. Think about the sheer volume of trauma the nomadic culture has absorbed.
They survived the lethal freezing winters and the expanding arid deserts. They survived the brutal, systematic political purges of the 20th century that sought to erase their spiritual identity.
They survived the utter, spectacular collapse of the greatest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. They simply adapted and kept riding.
The psychological and physical adaptability required to endure that spectrum of collapse is staggering, and it raises a final, deeply provocative thought.
As we look toward an uncertain global future, perhaps that very same ancient nomadic adaptability, the ability to pack up a city, to find water in a cold desert, to respect the lethal force of nature rather than trying to conquer it, will be the exact mechanism that outlasts the fragile digital age.
It's a wild thought experiment. If the global servers went down tonight, if the intricate, delicate supply chains of the modern world were to simply disappear tomorrow morning, the hyper-connected city dwellers of the globe would immediately descend into panic.
But the nomadic herdsmen watering their horses in the Orkhon Valley, the Kazakh eagle hunters tracking foxes in the snowy Altai Mountains, the Satan relying on their reindeer in the freezing northern taiga, they wouldn't even blink.
The Mongolian steppe might just carry on without skipping a single beat.
Because they've already mastered the ultimate survival skill. They know exactly how to survive the end of an empire.
That framing completely changes how we view what true, lasting resilience looks like.
And remember that ancient curse we discussed in the very first minute. The legend stating that if the hidden tomb of Genghis Khan is ever found, the world will perish. Maybe the Mongolians know exactly what they are doing by letting the violent sandstorms and the remote, snow-capped mountains keep that secret.
Maybe they understand that some mysteries and some ways of life are meant to stay buried deep in the wild, completely untouched and uncorrupted by the modern world.
Thank you so much for joining us as the third person in this conversation today. If you are feeling suffocated by the endless notifications, the artificial lights, and the frantic pace of your screens, remember that there is a vast, quiet, unyielding step out there. Go take a walk outside. Let your mind touch the grandeur of nature. We will see you next time on The Deep Dive.